very much. I'm Neville from DDoB. My background is in program analysis, and today I'm going to be talking about relative strength of DDoB, which is about doing these impact studies for a lot of EIPs that are being proposed. I know that most people in the room want to change the EVM in some way or another, but sometimes it's hard to predict, in which way there's the least impact on negative impact on projects. So that's what we did. So yeah, we're a security vendor. These are some of our clients. We also do tools. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for. So contract libraries, a blockchain explorer with an integrated decompiler in it, and Watchdog is a smart contract security suite with also a monitoring solution in it. We're also known as white hat hackers. So we did a bunch of public vulnerability disclosures over the years. There's some very interesting ones, including one for multi-chain, where we actually found, $1 billion vulnerability which could have easily been exploited. In addition to that, we also found a CVE in Uniswap, and we're one of the only teams that managed to do so in a competition. All right, getting to the meat of the subject. So the EVM doesn't miss a beat. Yet, there's a lot of things that were designed, back in 2016 or so that are, no longer tenable, I guess, for the future versions of Ethereum. And obviously, doing these upgrades is very difficult because not only do you introduce more complexity, but you also run the risk of breaking stuff, right? So our contribution to this has been that of doing impact studies. Okay, so there's two kinds of impact studies that we've done for Ethereum. Some involve changes in gas semantics, and then we've also done impact studies on other changes which are more radical. So the engagement starts kind of like with a question. So if this EIP gets implemented, which smart contracts or which projects are going to be borked by this? And are these smart contracts really important? Or are they just, some MEV bot which holds no funds, for instance? We established, ways to kind of like measure these kinds of impacts. So in theory, our job is to consider the current semantics of the EVM, and let's call that EVM, and the upgraded EVM, let's call that EVM prime, that is going to run smart contracts with the new EIP implemented. Now, we theoretically would be considering for all executions of all smart contracts, how many break on EVM prime but do not break on EVM. And out of these, which ones are actually important? Now, I'm using a lot of unscientific terminology here. For instance, what does for all executions mean? What does break actually mean? Now, let me just simplify this a little bit. So we are actually just looking at interesting executions when conducting these impact studies. And finally, something which is subjective. What is an important contract? Okay, and there's some methods that we have developed to address this as well. So when I refer to for all executions, I actually mean static program analysis. And the team at DDoB, we have done a lot of static analysis work for Ethereum smart contracts, and a lot of static analysis work generally for many other languages. And the flavor of static program analysis that we adopt at DDoB is declarative program analysis. And it works like this. Now consider the program on the left-hand side. Now this is not a bytecode program, this is an intermediate representation, which we can get via our decompiler or via some other way through the source code. We turn this intermediate representation into a database form. Consider a database, for instance, having relations such as variables or assignments and things like that. Okay, so we turn it into that format, and then we run queries on this format to implement program analysis algorithms. So think algorithms like data flow analysis and things like that, but also other more sophisticated things like entire SMT solvers using this query language. Okay, and then we use a language called Datalog. So Datalog is a logical language, but it's typically implemented using relational database techniques. And the ability of this language is to is to query like highly recursive things from the data that you have. Okay, so, and then if you consider that a lot of program analysis algorithms are highly recursive, you know, like for instance, data flow analysis and variations on top of that, then this becomes a very ideal language to write these analysis algorithms in. In fact, we have written an entire decompiler in this language. Okay, so remember, so Datalog is optimized for complexly recursive queries, which we would need to write program analysis algorithms in. Now, despite all of this technology, theoretically, you still cannot reason about all possible executions in general, right? There's limitations. And so instead, we simplify the problem a little bit. So first, we focus on interesting executions, so executions that will break. And secondly, we use abstraction. So I'll give you a concrete example here. Let's say, for instance, we're doing a gas analysis here. And you know, there's some opcodes that are going to change their gas semantics. We might consider, for instance, based on an intuition of what the change will do, we might consider only executions of the fallback functions and up to a depth of 2,300 units of gas. Now, at programs that are that small, you can certainly enumerate all possible executions if you're only considering the gas, right? And then obviously there's many other things that we've done along the way, like for instance considering whether some reentrant calls via the fallback functions. Okay, so, and now here's another example which is even more interesting. Now for one study we had to consider functions that could possibly parse RLP, right? So we wanted to all the smart contracts, which smart contracts parse be a change in the future proposed for changing you know, from RLP to SSD. So RLP is recursive length prefix, is one of the main formats used in the execution layer. All right, so we developed two different techniques to do this, one using static analysis and one using dynamic analysis. And these are completely different techniques. For the static analysis, we figured out that most RLP libraries would contain a loop. And within that loop, they would have specific comparisons to magic constants. So these constants are part of the specification of RLP. And once we wrote this static analysis to find these, boom, we found our smart contracts that could possibly decode RLP. But we also, to maximize kind of like the reliability of the study, we also looked at dynamic analysis. And in that case, we found smart contracts that through their call data, they have received RLP encoded data. Now, how do we do this reliably? Again, so over there, we figured out that the RLP encoded data is usually represented as bytes. And the solidity will give you a length, so right before the actual bytes, there's a length of those bytes. And then within RLP, there's also a length field. Now, if you compare these two length fields, which are going to be there in predictable spots, you can certainly figure out that that's most likely to be RLP. In a concrete example, this is undecoded call data, and the orange bit there is the length prefix for the bytes, and the blue part of RLP. They're not exactly the same numbers, and we actually use that in our favor to actually make sure that these are RLP. Okay, now finally, there's another problem that we need to solve, and this is a very important one because, you know, these impact studies need to be inexpensive, relatively, you know, they need to be conducted within a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, and so for this, we need to find which smart contracts are actually important. Now, this might sound like it's simple, but if there's 100 million smart contracts deployed, how do you get this set down, you know, to the correct one? So, there's some few heuristics here. Obviously, if a smart contract is part of a major protocol, it's probably important. If it holds funds, probably important as well. But there's a few other things that are more difficult. Let's say a smart contract controls another smart contract, or a smart contract has a credit with another smart contract, which is not ERC20, for instance. How do you figure that out? And, you know, for that we developed several heuristics based on past executions and things like that. And also, things like, recency, whether it's been recently used. Now, getting all of this requires specialized ETL and data infrastructure, which is comparable in complexity to building a blockchain explorer for security, which is also the reason why we've built an explorer with an integrated decompiler, which has become relatively popular with the security community. All right, so here's a summary of some of our results. For an impact study we conducted for vertical trees, which is slated to change the main data structure from a Merkle-Patricia tree to a vertical tree, that required some gas cost changes, all right? Now, we calculated that the gas is going to increase by, cost consumption is going to increase by 26%, but then there were some pathological cases which are very weird, and it depends really how the Solidity compiler is going to compile your contract. Okay, and we've made some recommendations also in the for Solidity compilation that might address this in the future. But if this is going to be implemented to reduce the gas cost, also perhaps the Solidity compiler might change to optimize for this kind of output. Removal of self-destruct. There were like 4 to 6 different proposals being discussed. Some of them were quite complicated. If complicated proposals for removing self-destructs were implemented, those would need to be re-implemented for every single client, for every single person that is implementing tools to analyze smart contracts. So I feel like we dodged the bullet there because we actually found a relatively simple EIP which removed the effects of self-destruct, which actually didn't do a lot of havoc to protocols. So we found some of the protocols that needed some smart contracts to be upgraded, and we actually also notified the protocols as part of the study, and they were like, yeah, sure, when it's implemented, we'll just upgrade these 2 smart contracts and we'll be good. So everyone's happy. Another one was for account abstraction. So at some point, EIP 3074, which was a very powerful account abstraction proposal, it proposed the changing the semantics of TX origin. Now at that point, we were worried that because the semantics of TX origin change, people might be using, for instance, reentrancy guards, which involve TX origin, or flash loan protection guards, which involve TX origin. We did find this in many protocols. For instance, protocols like Yearn or BedgerDAO, they used flash loan protection by checking TX origin, which could be subverted with this new EIP. Now that wasn't so much of an issue because everyone knew that this might change in the future, but other things like reentrancy protection using TX origin was an issue. All right, so I've come to the end of my presentation. Essentially what the focus here was that evaluating the impact of EIPs and sets of changes on smart contracts and on several hard contracts is a hard problem in general. But there are a lot of intuitions for, it depends really on the kind of EIP and the kind of change that is going to happen, that we can apply these intuitions to develop static program analysis or dynamic program analysis that capture most of the projected impact of these EIPs, and also using some interesting blockchain indexing techniques, we can pinpoint exactly which smart contracts and which protocols will be impacted and by how much, and they can be upgraded months in advance. All right, so through the impact studies, we've simplified some design decisions, informed the community, and also averted issues in ecosystem contracts. And this is our Twitter channel. I mean, if you want to subscribe, I'm done. Do you have any questions?
We might have time for one question if anyone has a question. Otherwise, show your appreciation, please. No questions? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, wait, okay, we have one here. Wait for the microphone so that they can hear you.
Yeah.
Live.
Are these tools available to other people to use on the contracts that they believe are important, like their own?
Well, so parts of them are open source, like for instance the decompiler on top of which we run the static analysis algorithms. They are open sourced, so they can be rewritten, but then the results, we make them available, and also the reports.
Okay, then I think that's time. Thank you very much. Please show your appreciation for Neville Grech.